we'll be designing is what we call in this class generally the brief section, or what a professional magazine designer would call uh, the F.O.B, which stands for front of book. They don't call it briefs because that's just very conventional and standard in magazine design, that there's a section of shorter, sort of breezier items are up towards the front of the magazine, and then the magazine slowly turns into longer and meatier and more substantial pieces. That's fairly typical of the way a magazine is designed. Now, some magazines follow a slightly older convention where there's sort of a slip out, or a back of the book that is also of brief sections, of briefs. The New Yorker magazine does this. They have their talk of the town of short items in the front, and then in the back they have their culture section, which is shorter reviews, and their longer features mixed with cartoons and poems in the middle. But most magazines have abandoned that out. So it sort of gets, if you think of the curve of the experience, and this is a user experience, and it's a time experience just the same way a comic book or a movie would be. There's stuff designed to pull you into the magazine, and then there's the meat of the magazine. And the section we're going with is to start is the beginning of the magazine, the brief section. And I apologize because this is probably among the harder things for particularly inexperienced designers to do. It is a bunch of little things to get on the page, but I give it to you first because I don't grade it until the end of the semester. You have the whole semester to get this section right and to refine it and to keep poking at it. And that's what these sections just honestly, even if you're a professional, take, is they take some coming back to and working over. Now, there are a couple of things to know about these in a professional magazine. Obviously, not for a student project based on a professional project, but these sections are composed of decisions, and by decisions I mean design decisions, but I also mean content or editorial decisions that are made ahead of time, and decisions that are made, as each monthly or bi-monthly issue or whatever it is goes into production. So one of these decisions is what the section overall looks like. And that includes things like the section name. Now, this happens to be Preservation Magazine, and they happen to include, this is quite an old page, and I'll be showing you a mix of new and old pages. The name of the magazine on the section. The section has a distinct name, though, and a distinct identity within the magazine. It is Preservation News, and it always, in this case, not a decision I'm thrilled, I particularly support. It always has this sort of famous sculpture of a newsboy. I think that's in Philadelphia. I'm not positive where that is. Coming in and interacting with the logo. And it always had this slogan and this frame around it. And this is the first page of this section. This is what a designer would refer to as the signage of the section that identifies the section. And I don't have a second page of the section, but often the signage for a section like this gets smaller and more subtle with subsequent pages. So you introduce the section with a bang, sort of like it's a newspaper. It says on the front cover, whatever the name of the newspaper is, relatively big. And then every other page, in the folio or somewhere says what the name of the publication is, but it gets smaller. You establish the brand with some sort of big, high-impact piece of typography, but then you keep it as at least something that identifies what the section is, what its name is, and what the category of content is, because sometimes these are sort of catch-all sections. Sometimes these sections are a little bit more directed. Now, another decision that was made at one time, that doesn't mean that the magazine does it forever, but it means it does it for a period of probably a couple of years at least, is this piece right here. This is what we call in this class a branded feature. So it is within preservation news, but it's a regularly reoccurring section called transitions. And Preservation Magazine was all about architecture. I thought when it was at its best, it was about preservation of other kinds as well, but it was mostly about building preservation. And it's talking about buildings that were historical, that were lost, threatened, saved, and restored. And this is sort of a sidebar to the main section. And when we look at the rest of the pages, you'll note that most of these pages have like a focus. And I would say that this article is certainly the focus, the primary thing you look at on this page. It is a center of gravity around which everything else kind of anchors around. And that's one of the ways to think about successful pages in a section like this. And what distinguishes a section like this is it's not one long story. There's multiple little stories on a page. So this is one feature with 4 little sub-stories, and this is sort of the main feature. Now, the other thing you'll notice is that typographically, this is quite a lively page. We have this oversized type. This is not whatever this magazine's body copy is. This is just barely a paragraph of a story. And when I will be asking you to include 10 stories in your brief section, but that doesn't mean they have to be long. They could be quite short indeed, and they could be quite visually driven. And I'll show examples of that sort of design as well. And but it's also lively in terms of the colors and the fairly complex hierarchy where the address is put in blue, the category of building it goes into is red, and so there's a lot of color and changes on the page, and that's not just purely decorative. It also allows someone to scan it, to go from the big type or the prominent type to the less prominent type, and read this page in a way that isn't necessarily linear, but a little bit more interactive. Now, Esquire has basically does a redesign every year and changes its look. And so this is from a few years ago, and this is the name of their brief section at that time. I think they've since changed it. And it was called Man at His Best. And it always started with a really short story. And note that this is really, well, it's about 2 paragraphs worth of information, or one long paragraph, and a big picture. And because you're going to be doing multiple articles on a page, and the parameters of the assignment is that you have to have 5 pages of content, and you have to have 10 articles over those 5 pages, but one of those articles has to be like this one, a single page article. And this, as the first page of that section, is a logical place to put that single page article, because it gives you the room to make your logo for the section, which will be different than your logo for the magazine, a little bit bigger, and it gives you a opportunity to sort of start out with a bang. And we'll talk more about magazine pacing as we put everything together. So that's the first piece. But in terms of the branding of this section, in terms of thinking about decisions that you have to make all at once, but a magazine designer would make over a course of time, there are decisions that are made ahead of time, like the decision we're working on now in terms of the body copy and other styles, and also in terms of the logo for the section. It's not a super fancy logo, but it is the typeface they use consistently for this section, and also in terms of the way they frame things. You can see there's this, what an old-time designer would call an Oxford rule, when you see 2 lines that are roughly the same width that go parallel. If they're different widths, that's a Scotch rule. And also this chevron square in the corner. And I just want you to notice those now, because we are going to look at the second page of this section, and I want you to see how those ideas populate onto that page. So here, the logo indeed does become smaller and less prominent. We've established the identity of the section. We have another branded feature. This would have run in this space, probably on the second page, every month as long as they kept up this magazine. And it's called, whoops, back, the agenda week by week. And this is really just a construct for presenting information that's going to happen during the month. It's a way, it's a format for presenting information, and as these stories are. And then we have another short really story, another short rule. We have another branded feature which ran in Esquire for years, called the rules. And some of them were facetious, some of them were serious, some of them were supposed to be funny. And then we have this about this guy in the wacky outfit. I don't remember what that's about, but it doesn't matter. And then the story about a car. So if you look at this page, it also is a very lively page. That's what these pages are supposed to be. We are working on our body copy now, but there are times when you deviate for your body, provided you're doing it intentionally and for typographical reasons. Once you have your body established, you shouldn't just squeeze it or or grow it to fit a space. But if you have a design reason to bring emphasis to one particular story, that's perfectly fine. So this story happens to be in a bolder type. That story happens to be in a lighter type. The story happens to have a rule underneath each line of type, and that is also something that could be built into a style sheet. But if you look at this page, very lively, a lot of information, but very short information. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We can almost count up 8 stories, depending on how we count them, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stories if you consider week by week a single story. But however you count them, uh, it's a page that's exciting to a reader. It's a page that has a lot of variety, and it's a page with a lot going on. Pages are not always that full. This is from Popular Mechanics magazine. I don't get Esquire anymore. When they changed their editors, I thought it went downhill, but I do still get Popular Mechanics. You could think of this as a 3 or a 4 story page. And we have the logo here. In this case, it's not Man at His Best. The name of the section is the Threat Report. And we have a little story in the margin. And we'll talk more about grids and how you create a system that leads to the creation of pages that are as exciting and engaging as this one. I was accused recently of loving yellow, and looking at the slideshow before showing it to you, I realized there are a lot of pages with a lot of yellow on them. So if there's too much yellow, I apologize, but I think it's a really effective color for catching the reader's attention. This is a food-oriented brief section with little bits about how to make crostinis. In this case, the branding of this section extends to the numbers and the arrows and the lines. This is a fairly old page from Dwell. I wanted to show this to show that pages don't always have to be super structured like the Esquire page. They can be a little bit more free form. But like that last one, it has a clear focus. In this case, the yellow is defining this story, and also the fact that this story gets the most space as the main story. This is a little bit unusual page in that it is not modular. And by modular, a modular story is a story where you can essentially draw a rectangle around every bit of it. And this piece, which is kind of triangular shape, from proximity that this blurb goes with this image, but it forms kind of a L shape. So making it fairly unlike most of the pages we've seen up to now. That doesn't mean that they're all like stuffed to the gills, but they are all modular in that I could draw a rectangle around this story, and I could draw a rectangle around that story. And that kind of approach to design, or we can even go back one more, rectangle around this story, rectangle around that one, rectangle around that one. And approaching pages, and of course, rectangle around that one, but approaching pages in a modular way makes it easier for the reader to tell what goes with what, to connect content to the image that is associated with it. And you can see the cost of not being modular on this page. And it's a beautiful page, I think. I think it's a lovely page. But what this designer is using instead is white space. This text could not go with this image because it's too far apart. This text goes with that image because it's really close to it. And the same is true with this one. Um, and it could lead to beautiful design not being modular, but it also means pages that are probably a little bit more open and less efficient in terms of the amount of content you can have. And here's just an updated version of that same section from a few years later. Now, one of the things I talk about in this class is what I call popcorn pages, and I'll show you a few of these. I would have to double check the syllabus, but I believe it's an extra point if you include a popcorn page in your brief section. And a popcorn page would be an extra point and would include one and could substitute for your single story uh, page if you liked. And it is also usually, when they're incorporated, the first page of a brief section. This happens to be More Magazine. They're enforcing their brand by including it there. And the name of the section is Now. And instead of starting with a big photo and a short story, they are starting with a bunch of little stories. And that requires a fair amount of typographical savvy to pull one of these pages off. And because we see a lot of variety and we see ourselves being pulled around the page to focus on particular stories. But we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 like really mini stories on this page. Here's another example. So they did something completely different another month. These are also good pages for infographics. So we have a little bit of a pie chart here, I believe, and a big number. Big number is not a infographic per se, but telling stories with numbers is a way to engage the reader. People tend to be attracted to numbers. This is a different magazine. In this case, they turned their popcorn page over to a bunch of quotes. So it has a little bit of consistency, but also a little bit of sameness. Another page from Notebook, completely different approach. And again, that's part of why I love magazine design, is those decisions you make early carry on, but in any month you can look completely different than you did the next month. So this page is just a completely different scene than that one. And that's perfectly fine. Magazines are an opportunity to be creative within a system. This is New York Magazine during one of its golden ages. This is a popcorn page around a theme of interns. So, and here's just a couple of examples of those sorts of decisions that are made ahead of time and that repeat every month. The signage and the rules. Whoop. And there's that Esquire page. This was the stuff you would see every month. And then whatever gets poured into this template or gets poured into this structure is what changes. And that doesn't mean it's exactly the same. This might be, the rules might be moved to another page, and this might be one big article, and that might be another one. There are a lot of ways to use this space, but the point is that these are decisions that are made ahead of time, and content decisions are sort of made as you go along. And that's just the nature of doing periodicals, whether it's magazines or newspapers or newsletters or what have you. So for the first section, everyone is doing a brief section. It should have one branded feature like this one. It should have signage on every spread that identifies the name of the section. I encourage you, but do not require you, to start that signage in a bolder and bigger way on the first page. Establish the brand big early. And It should have 10 articles that are separate and on different topics. I've sometimes have students that have tried to like turn a list 10 great kitchens into into a brief section, and it just doesn't really work because that's not what that is, and that's not what these sections are. These sections are supposed to be variety, and they're supposed to be lively. So a really short book review could be next to a really short interview. That's what these sections are about. Now, I will be recording soon a video about infographics. And the thing about infographics in magazines is that they can be uh, in support of a story. So you could have a feature and there's a infographic explaining some aspect of what the text is talking about. Infographics can also be freestanding features where there's usually a head and a deck, and then the infographic, just all on its own without any text around it, tells a story. And if you include your infographic in your brief section, that could count as one of your 10 stories.